Hello, you welcome to the Inside. I am Babile Jonathan. The death of the president of Chad, Idriss Déby Itno, has sparked fears that Chad's problems and those of its allies, including Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, Nigeria, Cameroon, Central African Republic, may deepen. The African Union says Déby's death is not only a loss to Chad, but the African continent as a whole. And Chad has remained a country of concern for the African Union Peace and Security Council, mainly because of insecurity, which has now claimed the life of President Idriss Déby Itno, who, according to the military of Chad, was killed during clashes with rebels in the northern part of the country. And of course, the African Union has been expressing concerns concerning the death of Idriss Déby Itno. But speaking during the funeral of Idriss Déby Itno, French President Emmanuel Macron reiterated his country's commitment to ensure the stability and integrity of Chad. He said France will not allow anyone to destabilize Chad or jeopardize its integrity. We will take a look at all these, and we'll also talk about economic empowerment of Africans for economic independence from the West. Meet our guest in some few seconds. Our guest today is Professor Akumbo Mark Anthony. He's a civil society leader, founder and chairman of United Africa for Economic Empowerment, university lecturer of Banking and Finance and Theology in the landmark University of Boya and the Christos Theological University of Douala. He is the Chancellor of the Christos Theological University of Douala. Professor, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Babila. Thank you for the opportunity, and I believe that being here is just a privilege.
We begin in Chad, where the country's president died recently, Idriss Déby Itno, and his death has sparked fears that the security problems in that country could worsen, and also the security situation of the Sahel zone and even the Central African Republic, and of course in the allies of Chad, including Mali, Niger, Central African Republic, Cameroon, Nigeria, and even Burkina Faso could worsen. What do you think about this?
It is something to actually get worried about, Babila. If you have to go back in the 80s, you discover that Chad as a nation is a nation that was actually filled with so much rebellious activities. And looking back to when Déby came back from France in the early 80s and late 80s, his fight against the Libyan occupation of his country and the terrorist attacks from Libya in his country, when Abré Hussein actually received him, he gave him a top rank in position which permitted him to actually fight against rebellion and also to push out the Libyans that were in Chad. And apart from that, if you look at it, it's until when he came to power in 1990, after he overthrew his former boss, Hissène Habré, and it came to power, you discover he fought and made sure that he gave stability to his nation for the first 5 years. Then the 6th year he reintroduced, or say, I should not just use the word he introduced, democracy, because he actually made such promises in 1982 and brought back multipartyism there in 1982. But the first election that took place in Chad took place in 1986, after that new constitution had been amended. And at that particular moment, he won the election, won again in 2001. And until France came in 2006, changed the constitution to maintain him, because he had given his voice and his word to his people that is not going to actually run again for elections. But when France changed single-handedly, we should be careful about that. France single-handedly changed the constitutional chart, influenced the president refused, that is not going to be part of it because he has given his word to his people. Those are the words of Debbie. I'm repeating.
But how can we understand this? Another country imposing itself on another independent country to the point of changing its constitution and forcing the head of state to remain in power.
You see, that's where I was driving to talk about it and use the words that the president of France actually made today, when he declared that France would not allow any disturbance in Chad. That statement actually affected me, because I asked the question, who is this guy? Is it because France is supposed to be called the colonial master? And if you listen to the last, should I say, campaign speech of Idris Deby, you realize and start asking questions. Was he not killed? Is it just the rebellion? Is it the rebels who actually killed him, or was it
the rebels?
So there are a lot of, it's a cloud of darkness that is covering a lot of facts, which I think that investigations are supposed to be open to expose what is happening. From the words of this president of France, Macron, you can see how influential they are over Chad and over almost all the 14 African nations which they colonized in Africa. Chad as a case study, which we are now talking about, if you look at it, they changed the constitution without his opinion. He never went for campaign. He won an election. Then he knew already that he does not have the power to remove himself from power. And I will be sincere in telling you this, that so France has.
He had to stay in power for 3 decades.
3 decades. And if he is dead today, I want to relate his death to the speech he made in the campaign. Because he said, enough is enough. Never again will the riches, or let me use that word, the wealth, I'm paraphrasing, of African nations, because it is not just particularized to Chad. He said of African nations. He says they come and carry our wealth and allow our people poor. He said never again. No more colonialism. Those statements are so strong that I think even the colonial master should be threatened. So the question we should be asking, is it France that killed him? Because many others had been killed. And he made a statement there that many political leaders have been killed in Africa. Anytime they want to fight for their people, they are killed. He made that statement during that campaign. I think the video is still there. With such declarations, it seems as if he already knew that talking about it is going to die. And the rebellion that he saw, he asked the question, who is it that is giving arms? Who is giving arms? He says the colonial master is giving the arms so that we fight and kill ourselves. And if he won this mandate, if he never died, that man was out to cut ties with the colonial master, and they saw it coming.
And it raises the concerns about the controversies surrounding his death. But as of now, official sources, according to the military, he received a bullet at the war front in a clash with FACT rebels in the north of the country, and he died of the injuries sustained there. Now, his death leaves a climate of uncertainty in his country.
Very true.
And then, apart from that, apart from the fact that he died, There are other things that happened immediately after he died. The Constitution suspended, the National Assembly dissolved, the government as well, and a military transitional council put in place, headed by his own son. When you look at Chad today and the future of that country, the possibility of chaos, was the possibility, what are the probabilities of chaos or stability reigning in that country?
I remember just this week I spoke concerning this on your platform during the point. I made a statement that it was an error for the son of Idris Deby to suspend the constitution of the nation, which is moving towards a democratic leadership. The fact that the constitution was suspended already indicates that more trouble is coming. It is true that Deby was a military person and he ended up with the title of I think Marshal. That being a title that warlords actually pick up. I think going in for a democratic election, which he won with about 70-something%, he was willing and ready to make sure he settled problems in his nation. I think his son should have been one of the best persons to know the vision of his father. But for the fact that he immediately came in and seized power, to an extent it could be wisdom, but to an extent it opens wounds. Why did I say that it could be a solution?
Wisdom, when there are a lot of criticisms coming in from here about this tendency of power moving from father to son.
I am one of those critics. I am not supporting it. I'm saying somebody might look at it and consider it to be wisdom. But I want to say that in my perspective, even if it is wisdom, it has a lot of problems attached to it. Considering that we are not only looking at the idea of seizing power, we are looking at the fact that he is the son of the former president. Coming in to take power seems as if it is a family throne. His father was on that seat for 30 years. Then he comes in, suspends a constitution which was just re-amended a couple of years back. I think that was 2018, or was it 2016?
2018, yeah.
To re-establish the two-term mandate. If that constitution, if you go to Article 81 of that same constitution, it gives the President of the National Assembly the right to step in for this transition to take place.
And his vice in case of his absence.
His vice in case of his absence. But look at it. He violates the Constitution. In fact, annuls the Constitution, dissolves the Assembly. Then, I think of recent, he came up with a call again that the ministers should be functioning.
The government should be.
While he sets up a transitional government. But that is really funny. Why dissolve the government which was already in existence? Just let them keep running things, then let the President of National Assembly take over, then prepare for an election. That is how a democratic nation goes. But this nation, Chad, seems not to be. And I will tell you why I said it looks like wisdom is because in the midst of rebellious attacks like it was, there was need also for an immediate action, considering that the president in relation to the military communique was actually killed by rebels. If that is the case, then there is need for the military to keep on in their job. And somehow the son feels that I can't just let it go. I need to make sure that this nation doesn't crumble, let me step in. That is from the direction I spoke of about the wisdom. But like we have said, a lot of persons will not see it and will not want to accept it because it violates the constitution of the nation. It violates democratic principles that are being laid down in that nation.
And the opposition in Chad is strictly against the putting in place of the Military Transitional Council and all what is happening there. One of the opposition leaders, Succès Masra, who was eliminated from the presidential race over age issues, told us in an interview that what happened there was a coup d'etat, yes. And that he had told President Idriss Déby that his 6th term of office was not necessary, was going to create chaos. And now that he actually got the 6th term and he is no more, and the atmosphere in the country remains quite tense, and the opposition have been complaining of excessive use of military force against the opposition. The risk seems to be significant, the risk of an explosion, the risk of chaos.
I feel like it is going to be a devastating situation. I like using that word because I'm trying to look at the field over there with rebels already well armed, not any kind.
Rebels who are also against the putting in place of the transitional military council.
The opposition who is actually against the transition, for the opposition, they practically can't do anything because it is the military. If they can only talk, but those who can really do something are the rebels. They might continue their campaign and keep on fighting, and that will cause chaos not only in Chad, like we already saw during in fact the day before the death of the president of Chad. We saw crowds of people leaving Chad to Cameroon, and that
because of the uncertainty. And
yes, nobody actually can, knowing that my country is at war, I won't sit there. I remember I was using my situation as an individual. I was living in Equinoxe, and when the crisis came to Equinoxe, seriously in Cameroon here, I had to leave Equinoxe to Douala without even thinking, based on what I saw. You don't expect somebody to just sit there. The person you'll be exposing yourself to death. So a lot of them ran. Some, I'm sure, entered Nigeria, some entered Cameroon, some will be entering Central African Republic, except that there's also war in Central African Republic. So with all this instability, the death of Idriss Déby is not going to only be a hard hit on Chad. It's actually going to destabilize a lot of things in Central African sub-region. It's going to in fact, when we look at the Chad basin, the Lake Chad basin, which has Nigeria, Niger, Cameroon, and Chad put together, it is
with the terrorists operating
along. So it is going to be something that we are not going to just sit and talk. Look at it. If you remember, Idriss Déby is one of those persons that pushed away the terrorists Boko Haram back into hiding in Nigeria, and he has been able to sustain rebellion from his nationals in the northern part for over 30 years. It's not a matter of 2 days. And so in one way or the other, he was indeed a strong man.
But some look at that as an aspect of failure in his 30-year rule. The fact that he couldn't completely bring the terrorist movements to silence and kind of integrate them into national life. The terrorists existed through his reign, and they kept on fighting, even though he won most of the battles.
It is true that people might want to give their perspective of things, but I don't immediately rush into concluding that is a failure, because should we go back to the past and find out the state of Chad from independence? 5 years after independence, Chad entered into rebellion. Rebellious groups came up. And with the coming up of rebellious groups, there's no president that ever successfully ruled beyond 15 years. The first one did so. The rest, and Idris Deby, I think is the fifth president, was the fifth president of Chad. So those before him, they were not able to succeed in quelling down rebellion, even though France has a, you see, this is the issue. France is having a military base in Chad.
And for at least a couple of times, the French military has helped to push back the rebels who were already taking over the capital and proceeding to the presidency.
They have a military base in Chad. That means rebellion should have stopped long ago, if they are not the ones in support of it. That's the same thing we are talking about Mali today, where Chad could send 2,000 soldiers to the Sahel as a member of the Sahel. When Chad, in Mali, France has a military base. France is based there. You start asking questions. What then is the function of the military in Africa? Why is the French military found in Chad and there is rebellion? Can't they use their superior expertise, as they claim, and quell it down?
Well, other where politicians in Chad, opposition politicians, and even the civil society, and even the rebels themselves, are rejecting all what is happening, or what is being put in place as transition and so on. Countries like France and even Cameroon, to an extent, during the funeral of President Idris Deby, we saw the Minister of Defense in an audience with the President of the Military Transitional Council, seem to be standing behind the structure that has been put in place, the transitional structure that has been put in place, headed by General Mahamat Deby.
I'll tell you that most African leaders, they have the nationalist mindset, not Pan-Africanist mindset. And because of this nationalist mindset, they mind the affairs of their nations and not those beyond their borders. Borders which were actually created by foreigners, created by Europeans without the consent of our African people. And as a result of that, if you look at precisely the Central African area soon, it seems as if when affairs are happening in the house of one another, the other person doesn't talk. So when I saw the condolence message from the president of Cameroon, and also the message to
I mentioned the military transitional council.
Yes. When I saw that aspect of it, I said, wow, this is an endorsement in one way or the other. But to an extent, we can't just go into say, okay, maybe he endorsed. He's just minding his affairs, saying, okay, whatsoever is happening there, we just wish the best for the people. France, which stands as the so-called colonial master, seems to, I'm sure he said that the transition should not destabilize democratic principles. So he's in one way playing his politics of struggling to accept and at the same time telling them there's need for a transition that's supposed to be civilian in question. But like I said, we have nationalists in African politics, not Pan-Africanists, because Pan-Africanists think of the entire African continent and look into the affairs of each other, try to see how we can stand together and solve our problems as a people. But that is lacking in most of the French-speaking nations. It is very important to notice that the French-speaking nations in West Africa have been so much influenced by those in the English, by those of the English cultural background, colonial background. And now people do interfere. For example, when the coup d'etat took place, you discovered that the ECOWAS intervened.
Stood out strong.
Yes, intervened, went in for a negotiation. But here in Chad, nothing has happened. But in Mali, the president didn't die. Here in Chad, I'm sure that after the burial, we are expecting to see what the sub-region is going to do. If they can interfere, then step in and say, okay, let's negotiate this transition. In West Africa, in Mali, the ECOWAS came in, actually negotiated and limited the time of the transition so that it should not be a military rule. And look at it, with that intervention, who is actually the prime minister of Chad, of Mali now, is not a military person, is a civilian.
However, the military in Chad,
even the person who is the president in Mali, who, let's say the transitional president, is an ex-military person. He is not a military person anymore. So that goes to tell you something. When we intervene, when we interfere in the case issues of our brothers, we can solve them and give them good results.
In Chad, the vice president of the Transitional Military Council said that that the military has no intention to seize power, but that power will be transferred to the civilians.
But they already
We're looking up to that.
They already seized power because
for a period of 18 months.
That's too long. The Constitution does not permit that. The Constitution gives a very short time limit for the elections to be reorganized.
45 days or 90.
Yes. So if they are going for 18 months, that's 1 year, 6 months. That's too long. And if that is not seizing power, then I don't know what we should be calling that. That to me is a coup d'etat.
That's what some of the politicians, those of the opposition in Chad, have been saying, that it was actually coup d'etat, a mask coup
yes,
d'etat
it is
that happened there. And now, when you look at what French President Macron said, when he said that France will not allow anybody to destabilize Chad or to jeopardize its integrity, what do you read within the lines of that statement?
That is going back to pin on the point I said. We seems to be independent, but we do not have independence. African nations, precisely those under the French rule or the Francophonie, they seems to have independence, but they do not have independence. France has been in Chad for as long as we can name it. And they did not stop the rebellion. What makes us to believe that the statement of Macron is a guarantee for stability in Chad? There is no guarantee. His statements are just like a wave of wind blowing. He has a military camp, a military base in that nation. The rebellion killed the president of the nation. Where were they to protect the president if in case they won't allow anything to happen? So that is just water that has gone under the bridge. He made his statements and he's leaving, but the truth is the intention of the French in Africa, and not for the Africans, is for the French. The French are in Africa, not for Africans, but for the French. So when we are talking, we should know that France is there because they want to get what they have. There is oil.
The interests of France.
They are protecting their interests. And if the rebels do not go close to their interests, they can allow the rebels to keep functioning. But if the rebels come close to their oil and every other mineral that they are actually taking out of Chad, then they will intervene.
We're going to take a look at what the newspapers reported this week. Immaculate Fogwe takes us to the newsstands, and after that, we'll look at the possible consequences of the death of Idris Deby Itno and a possible situation of chaos in Chad on the other countries that depend or that are connected to what is happening in Chad, notably Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and of course Burkina Faso, Cameroon, and the Central African Republic.
The Reporter, the Guardian Post, and the Herald Tribune report on the laying to rest of Christian Cardinal Thumi at the Cathedral and his elevation as Commander of National Order of Valor. The Voice Weekend and the Sun says Honorable Emilia Mojowa Lifaka, Deputy Speaker at Cameroon's National Assembly, dies. Eden, battle against COVID-19, 4 vaccines on immunization plan. The Horizon exclaims, fight against COVID-19, Chief Joseph Jangute's government lead by example as they get vaccinated. The Star, Minister of Public Health, storms the Southwest region with 12,000 vaccine doses. The Guardian Post reports battle to maintain grip on power. Chadian president dies after being shot at a war front. Another edition of the Guardian Post says Anglophone crisis, Germany rules out foreign intervention. The Horizon, Sonora is the most indebted public state company. The Post Weekender, government stops the payment of VIP prisoners' medical bills.
Thank you, Immaculate Fogwe, for the press review. Professor Akumbom Mark Anthony, civil society leader, founder and chairman of United Africa for Economic Empowerment. The African Union said the death of Idris Deby Itno is not just a loss for Chad, but for the entire African continent. What influence will the happenings in Chad have on the Sahel zone, for example, or the Central African sub-region, in countries like Cameroon, like Central African Republic, in Nigeria, in Chad, where there are terrorist activities going on?
Like I mentioned earlier, you discovered that Deby, as an individual, was a fighter and a supporter and a Pan-Africanist who was willing to see Africa free from wars. Because if I remember back in 2016, when he became the president of the African Union, which is a 1-year mandate, he made mention of the fact that there is need for the whole war ideas in Africa to stop, that there is need for this rebellion and terrorism in Africa to be stopped by diplomacy or by force. Those are his statements. He said either by diplomacy or by force, it needs to be stopped. And in his term in office, he proved beyond that. You remember, I think it was 2000 the situation that happened in Mali, where he sent 2,000 soldiers as a member of the Sahel. He sent 2,000 soldiers there to fight the rebellion that happened in Mali. And also in Central African
Republic,
he sent 400 soldiers. That's to make you understand. Then not to talk of the
multinational
task force that is fighting in the Congo, the Chad Basin area, which includes Cameroon, which includes Nigeria, which includes Niger, includes Chad. I think even is it Benin also is included? No. So just imagine the role this man and his nation played in maintaining peace and stability in this Sahel, Central Africa, and the Lake Chad Basin area. He was a pivotal player in making sure that there is stability. So, what will you think will be the impact?
As the gendarme of the Sahel zone.
Yes, he was indeed the gendarme of the Sahel zone. Look at it right now. With his absence, what is the fear? The fear is, might be the next person that is coming up will not have that strategy, will not be willing to lend his hand, and what is going to happen? The terrorists will spread again across the Lake Chad Basin area and establish their caliphate. It's caliphate, right?
Yes.
That they intended to do, to establish. And the rebels in Mali, they might rise again. In Libya, they might extend their forces. Sudan, they might step in. He is the one who fought out the Libyans out of Chad, quelled down rebellion, made sure that some people say he failed, but the peace, in fact, the stable nation that we have today, even though there is rebellion within these days, is thanks to him. The dimension of prosperity that Chad has experienced is something that we should not just sing and talk about, but a man, he took his time to fight for his people. When the Chad-Cameroon pipeline was being established, do you know, at the beginning, the companies that were actually mining the oil were practically giving the nation just about 10%. And at a particular time, he hit his hand on the table and said, no, this thing has to end. We have it, the oil, so we should have at least 60% out of it. And that situation changed because the World Bank, which was in support of them building that particular pipeline, got at a particular period and was like, there is too much corruption. The president had to make it clear that what these people are giving us out of what they are taking from our nation is just a token, so we need more. There was a new agreement, and indeed they started getting more. And look at it, the corruption based situation in his nation. You know, in 2006, Chad stood at the top of corruption in the world. In the Forbes magazine, was the first nation in the world. But he created what we call the Operation Cobra. He came up with the Operation Cobra, like we have in Cameroon.
The Sparrowhawk.
Yes, Sparrowhawk. And with Operation Cobra, this is what he did. He fought corruption from within the government and within the nation.
Even though there's still a general outcry,
normally there is still corruption.
Over corruption,
but
and the fact that much of the country's wealth is concentrated or concentrated in the hands of some few persons, and there is serious poverty in the majority.
But that's capitalism. That's what people call democracy. Capitalism is for the few. Democracy is for the few. And it empowers a few persons and allows the others in hunger and poverty. But like I said, he made sure that he fought what was the corruption. And if you discover some few years back, I think a year or two behind, the nation of Chad came out 148 out of 160 something in the corruption page, which implies that they fought their way right deep down from first to 140 something. That already is proof that the man was working. But like you were mentioning that the rest of the nation is poor and a few persons are actually feeding fat from the wealth of the nation, it is almost everywhere in Africa. Look at it. It is based on the purported idea of democracy that has been imported from Europe, imported from the West. Africa does not need democracy as the West presents it in order to become a prosperous continent. I don't think that the prosperity of China today has any relationship with the Western idea of democracy? No. I don't think the prosperity of Singapore today has any relationship with the sole idea of Western democracy. No. When you look at Dubai today, has Dubai been built by democracy? No. So the idea of democracy, which is coming from the West, is the reason why a lot of people will remain poor while a few grow fat.
What kind of democracy does Africa?
Africa is a continent that grew and believed in strong men, not only. We saw institutions that were stabilized. We saw institutions and individuals that were there. Africans knew kings and kingdoms. Africans never knew democracy as per se. But it doesn't mean they were not practicing democracy. They were practicing democracy because there was federation in the African continent before the white man ever came here, where the king was there, then he gives power to different nobles to rule different areas, and when there are serious issues, they are brought to him. But there was a figure
synonymous
that protected
to the system in the United Kingdom.
Yes. And you see, with that, it permitted the people to not look at the president. There's so much opposition we are having today is not what we need in Africa. Europe never became democratic in one day. Take note of that. Europe had kingdoms, and for over 800 years, it is just about 200 years ago that they started the idea of accepted the idea of democracy. And today, you expect that African nations that were bundled and enslaved and later on colonized and then partitioned into pieces and then say we have colonized you and then come and say we are giving you independence. I heard Debbie the other day saying that independence is not given, it is taken on a rush. It's taken. And look at it, he's dead because he was looking for a means to make his people free. And with that, you expect that Africa, that 60 years ago was given a so-called independence, which he does not have the autonomy economically to control that independence, should be comparing with European nations? No, that's not what should be happening, Mr. Babila. We need to give time to Africa to grow, get mature, build its own system, and become a force on its own. If not, Africa will go back to be poor.
Before we proceed to talk about that, I want to know what should be done at this point in time to prevent a chaotic situation, not only in Chad, but in the other countries of the Sahel zone and even the Central African sub-region.
If I may present my opinion, I think that the so-called military transition power that is now existing, the time limit which they have given of 1 year, 18 months is too long. In order to quell down issues, there should be an election should be called up. When I speak like this, some people think that I'm speaking against myself because I'm asking for an election again, when I know that democracy is a failure. In relation to the Constitution, because a lot of people respect the Constitution and they are expecting to see the Constitution get full authority. You know, a Constitution bestows power on institutions, and if the Constitution is not respected, then the institutions will be kidnapped and weakened. Individuals take over the institutions and it gets weak, and now the focus becomes the individuals. So I think that it is necessary for the transition government to call for an immediate election that will permit those who are politicians to do the job of politicians, while the military remains in protecting the frontiers of the nation and maintaining security within the nation. That to me is what I think that should happen.
The military should hand over quickly to civilians to handle the affairs of the state.
Yes.
Now, we're going to take some interviews, and when we come back, we'll talk about empowerment of Africans for economic freedom from the West. Stay with us.
C'est un coup d'État. Et comme c'est un coup d'État, est-ce qu'on est en train de dire qu'il n'y a pas de problème dans cette sous-région Afrique centrale, dans cette Afrique, si on organise un coup d'État? C'est un coup d'État dans la mesure où la Constitution actuelle ne prévoit pas que ce soit l'armée qui prenne le pouvoir. La France s'est précipitée pour prendre acte. Prendre acte de quoi? Du coup d'État? Prendre acte de la transmission dynastique du pouvoir?
La France ne laissera jamais personne le remettre en cause et ne laissera jamais personne menacer, ni aujourd'hui, ni demain, la stabilité et l'intégrité du Tchad.
Donc nous aimerions un peu aussi qu'il y ait le dialogue entre maintenant la partie civile et puis la section militaire, pour qu'on y ait le dialogue. Et puis un civil aussi, ça représente tout ce que nous aimerions aussi, qu'il y ait la paix et la stabilité.
Nous avons perdu un grand homme de notre cher pays, le Tchad. Nous prions Dieu pour que tout soit stable dans notre pays.
I just want to thank all the bishops and archbishops and cardinals who described Cardinal Toomey in a way that I cannot. I just want to thank God for his life, for what he did, and pray that as he's gone, other younger people should emulate what he did and follow in the same footsteps.
Christian Cardinal Toomey, in the name of the President of the Republic, and by virtue of the powers conferred upon us, we raise you to the dignity of Commander of the Order of Valor posthumously.
When we come fully, tell others that this is our land. That is called hate speech. When people use their numbers deliberately to suppress others, when people use their positions of power to intimidate, suppress, frustrate others, that is called hate speech. When we discriminate against disabled, the less privileged, that's called hate speech. I came to this because this is what is current as doctrine, which the government is preaching to all of us, and it will descend also in our own small communities. Because of the prevailing crisis, chiefs have not met as a body to congratulate the Prime Minister, head of government. We therefore use this sitting to formally send our heartfelt congratulations to the Prime Minister, head of government, His Excellency Chief John Gute Joseph.
Thank you for staying with us, Professor Mark Anthony. We are talking now about empowering Africans for economic freedom. Why are we talking about economic freedom? Are Africans in slavery?
Thank you for that question, Mr. Babila. I made mention here that most of our African nations were given the so-called independence, political independence, but they lack the economic power to actually autonomize that independence. It's an independence without power. And economics is the power behind that political independence. You see, today, if we have most of our youths struggling to run across the borders, struggling to go through the deserts, and some of them drown and die in the Mediterranean Sea, some successfully cross over because they are searching for something. What is that? They call it greener pastures. But I bet you Africa is the richest continent in the whole world.
Yet the poorest.
Yet with the most poorest people, not the poorest, because Africa remains the richest continent, whether we like it or not. It has the most poorest people. Nations that they call the poorest nations, because I hear people call Central African Republic poor, but it has gold. It's not a poor nation. It is a rich nation, but the citizens are poor because they have been brainwashed. Africans generally have been brainwashed. The cultural background of the African people was distorted, and strange cultural ideas and values were introduced to them that makes them to devalue themselves and makes them to underlook themselves and disbelieve in what they have. Africans do believe in what comes from Europe than from what is comes from Africa. We have vast territories of land. I'll tell you 60% unfarmed arable land is found in Africa. I mean, of the world is found in Africa. Which implies that we have what it takes to take care of the entire world. And I'll show you another aspect of it.
So why are the people poor?
Before
why
I get to
are
that,
nations
before I get to that, I'll show you another
or classified as poor and indebted
and heavily indebted. Before I answer that question, let me show you another aspect of it, Mr. Babila. In Africa, every year we receive, this is UN report I'm bringing to you, we receive aid of over 56 billion US dollars coming into Africa every year. But this same Africa each year, according to UN statistics, actually through illicit financial flow loses over 86 to 90 billion US dollar every year. That is just an estimation. I believe it is beyond 100 billion US dollar every year. Just look at it. Can you compare 100 billion US dollar and 56? Which implies at the end that Africa as a continent is the greatest creditor to the nations of the world. So we credit nations of the world with our wealth illicitly being transferred out of Africa.
And that paradox is what is difficult to understand. So we are begging or taking loans
when we are
more than 50 billion US dollars and then sending out
more than 100,
not even through the legal means but through illegal channels, close to 100 or more billion dollars,
which we were supposed to take that same money, refuse the aid, and invest what we have in our nation. It will empower the youth to have jobs and they will not think of running out of the country. But look at it. It goes out illicitly and we end up being indebted. We abandon true wealth in Africa. We are rushing behind papers in Europe. Africans give out their wealth and collect loans. What are loans? Pieces of papers that have been cut and given over to them. Then we claim that we are taking loans. We need to correct that. So what accounts for that? I said earlier, it is because most of those that are leading us and most Africans had been brainwashed through the education that they had received. We have been made to believe that we are supposed to work to eat. We have been made to believe that we need to be schooled so that we can have good grades, so that we can get good jobs. And so our education is job oriented, not creativity. And the nation and the wealth of a nation, Mr. Babila, is not calculated based on the amount of money that the nation has in its treasury. Neither is it based on the minerals that are found on the earth. The wealth of a nation, if you go by the United Nations definition, is actually defined by 3 words or 3 letters. You have, let me use it 3 words. You have GDP. That is
gross domestic
product or productivity, because you can't talk of product without the individual. So it boils back to the fact that the wealth of the nation is not the material, it is the people. And when the people are not well educated, when the people are not given skills, when the people are
well trained
and educated, they become beggars. They underuse the resources that are embedded in them. They lack creativity, and as a result of that, the nation remains poor. I'll tell you, the wealth of a nation is based on productivity. Where does productivity come from? Productivity comes from creativity. Creativity comes from the ability to think. Once a nation does not have thinkers, that nation can never be creative, and that nation can never be productive. We remain consumers.
But there are just too many thinkers in African nations, administrations in African nations, the different ministries. There are just too many thinkers there, too many researchers there. What are they doing?
Mr. Babila, we do not have thinkers. We have robots trained to follow the book. We have individuals in administration who cannot bring a single idea. Look at it in Cameroon, where every letter that is written by a minister says it is coming from
high
instructions of the president, which implies that the president is the only person thinking for them. Then why were they appointed? That gives you the kind of leadership that we have all over Africa. In most African nations, we have individuals who come there because they think it is a place, it's for a job. They are in there for a job, not to help in creating wealth, not for the development of the nation. That is why an individual who has been given an opportunity to sit in a position like that thinks that the best thing to do is to swindle the money from that position into his personal bank account. And investment is the product of such individuals because they lack thinkers. A thinker is a creator. A thinker is somebody who is creative, and creativity bets productivity. And once you see productivity, then you see development follows. But when we do not have individuals who think, who are productive, we have a nation that is underdeveloped. We have poorly indebted nations like Cameroon. We just saw in Cameroon the debt index went beyond 10 billion. Whoa. Question, where did that money go to? If we had thinkers, if we had productive leaders, what will you expect? We will see development everywhere. 10 billion France CFA is capable of transforming a village, is capable of giving jobs to young people, is capable of establishing industries all over Cameroon. I saw rice gari that the Chinese people had actually branded and put it in a sachet of about, I think, 10 kilograms.
Gari.
Yes. And you know what? That is what most of our people want to import. When we have cassava tubers worked in Cameroon, we have great farms, lands. I mentioned earlier we have lands. Why don't we push and make sure that we empower young people to focus in productivity, in farming? I heard the president in his one of his outings said the youth should go to the farms. It's a good push, but the question is, with what? They don't have lands. They need to be given land because the government of Cameroon has taken possession of lands. It's no more run by the chiefs. It's no more the property of the indigenes of a particular community. it is owned by the government. So the government should take that initiative of giving land to young people and then empower them financially with materials to work. And when we work, we should create and establish industries that will transform and give value to the products that we produce. If Gary can be well packaged, preserved, and then sold and exported, we'll make more money. But we keep on importing even toothpaste
and exporting more of the raw materials.
Those are the things that cause Africa to lose more wealth than receiving it.
Professor Akumbo Mark Anthony, civil society leader, founder and chairman of United Africa for Economic Empowerment, university lecturer at the landmark university in Boya, chancellor of Christos Theological University in Douala. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Babila, for the opportunity.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. That's it for today. Goodbye.